I would like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to be part of the MONIQA Annual Conference and to contribute to this virtual event. During the next few minutes, I will be sharing with you the experience of creating a more convergent food regulatory environment at the regional level using the example of the Arab region and specifically of an initiative that took place between 2016 and 2019 with perspectives of development, an initiative known as the Arab Food Safety Initiative for Trade Facilitation. For the purposes of discussing this initiative, its drivers, the way it was implemented, and some of the learnings of its implementation, I would like to suggest that we look and review together this short video and then come back to some points of discussion. In January 2016, the Arab Food Safety Initiative for Trade Facilitation SAFE was launched with the overall mission to coordinate and possibly harmonize food safety regulatory measures in the Arab region, aiming for the enhancement of health and safety of Arab consumers and to enhance intra-regional trade in food and agri-food commodities, which in turn will reap benefits on Arab economies. 18 Arab countries were part of the journey, with the funding offered by the Swedish International Development Agency, SIDA. This initiative was implemented by the United Nations Industrial Development Organization UNIDO in partnership with the League of Arab States and its subsidiary organizations, the Arab Industrial Development and Mining Organization and the Arab Organization for Agricultural Development, with the important collaboration of representatives of the food production sector, mainly the Arab Union of Food Industries and the Arab Federation for Food Industries. SAFE has achieved both institutional and technical breakthroughs, starting with the creation of a regional food safety governance structure under the auspices of the Pan-Arab Free Trade Agreement, or PAFTA, called the Arab Task Force for Food Safety, or ATF. Throughout the life of the project, the ATF oversaw 5 initiatives led by 5 technical working groups, each under the leadership of an Arab country. Jordan, Lebanon, the Arab Republic of Egypt, the Kingdom of Morocco, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. These initiatives resulted in practical tools contributing to building blocks of convergent food regulatory measures such as 1. The issuance of Arab guidelines for a rapid alert system for food and feed, which aims to structure and fast-track information exchange related to food and feed safety incidents in the Arab region. 2nd, the coordination of Arab Codex initiatives with the development and issuance of guidance to enhance effective participation in Codex proceedings. 3. Competency enhancement and talent development through a network of Arab food risk assessment experts. 4. A guideline on the development and adoption of a common food import-export certificate to be used in Arab countries. And 5. The adaptation of the International Food Control Assessment Tool and the identification of priority food safety investments into Arab countries. At the institutional level, the ATF was anchored in the League of Arab States governance as decided by the Economic and Social Council of the League, adopting the ATF as one of its organs along with an SPS TBT committee. This initiative was implemented while ensuring gender balance in all events and activities that were organized. SAFE also powered targeted country-driven initiatives in several countries with specific agreements to enhance food safety performance in Egypt and Palestine. In Egypt, SAFE contributed to the initial institutional and program development of the newly created National Food Safety Authority, NEFSA, with an emphasis on capacity and competency development. In Palestine, the agreement with the Ministry of Health contributed to enhancing food inspection control systems. These efforts supported making food safety as a top agenda item for Arab senior decision and policy makers. SAFE continued to look to sustain and consolidate the investments made to date through the commitment of all the initiative's partners to continue towards building a common food safety regulatory environment in the Arab region. When we examine the initiative and we look at some of its drivers of success, well, first of all, there is a need to have a clear driver for realizing a regional food safety regulatory convergence, and part of the drivers tend to be economic drivers. At the regional level, the Arab region is a heterogeneous region in terms of countries that are producing and importing food and agri-food commodities. In fact, the region contains a number of countries that are considered to be important producers of food and agri-food products. And at the same time, there are a number of countries that rely very heavily on imports for their food supply chain. Yet, the intra-regional trade within the region was identified to be amongst the lowest at the intra-regional level. And there was therefore a high potential to increase such intra-regional trade. One of the elements of diagnosis that justified the reasons why countries in the region do not exchange food and agri-food commodities is the presence of technical barriers to trade in food and agri-food products. And definitely the heterogeneity of the food regulatory system in the region was a contributing factor. The other factor is also the fact that food control systems were not on par with each other. Some countries had mature food regulatory systems and food control systems. Others could be described as having nascent food regulatory environments. And as a result, there was a potential here to level the playing field, and through a momentum of food safety regulatory convergence to stimulate the intra-regional trade by the removal of some of these technical barriers of trade. Now, some of the elements of success is that this initiative relied upon a robust food safety coordination mechanism, the importance of the governance structure. The governance structure that was devised for SAFE was made of representations from competent authorities, from food competent authorities in the Arab region. These representatives were designated by the competent authorities themselves, and in fact formed a specialized high-level steering group that was tasked to govern and to steer the future of food safety regulatory harmonization. So the fact that the representation was deemed to be robust, meaning that it was meaningful for the various competent authority, contributed to the success of the governance structure. The other element of success is also the fact that this governance structure was anchored in the governance structure of the League of Arab States, that is the political organ within the region that gathers the various countries that are contributing to this initiative. And of course, in order to be successful, and knowing that food safety is essentially a technical field, there was a need to anchor the initiative with the contribution of experts from the region that were structured in the form of 5 expert working groups. And it was through a process of prioritization that this group, that is the Arab Task Force on Food Safety, so essentially this high-level steering group or governance group, basically identified 5 areas of priorities where the experts from the region needed to work together in order to chart a path forward for a more coordinated food safety environment. Amongst the initiatives that were selected, a risk assessment initiative. This was stemming from the understanding that if we are to achieve a convergent food safety regulatory environment, knowing that food safety decisions are very strongly wired in risk assessment and in scientific evaluations, there was a need to create a set of capacities and competencies at the regional level that would contribute to create this nucleus and the expert group that would guide those convergent food regulatory decisions. At the same time, there are areas that were more immediate and with more immediate impact, in fact, on the exchange of commodities and food and agri-food products. So, for example, the development of guidance to have a common, at least a common template and a common set of guidelines around the issuance of food import and export certificates. The information exchange was also identified as a key area, and the creation of an Arab rapid alert system for food and feed with the intent to fast track and to structure the information exchange on food safety incidents was identified as an area that would contribute, in fact, in the creation of linkages between food competent authorities at the region. And as we know, sharing information and sharing information effectively is a key element of creating trust amongst food competent authorities and therefore the development of collaborations and coordination. The importance of sustainability was another consideration that supported the elements of success of the initiative, and the fact that the governance structure, first of all, was well recognized by the political organs of the region, so essentially the League of Arab States and its subsidiary organization, but also that this governance structure was relying on a number of expert groups that were, in fact, the ones that were tasked with producing these guidelines, these protocols, these tools, these standards potentially that could constitute the basis of coordination and harmonization. So being able to anchor again the food safety governance structure in that political structure that is the League of Arab States and one of its councils was an important consideration. But also the recognition that food safety is a technical field, and then investing in areas of strengthening the competencies, the capacities, the tools, but also the generation of data was a key element that supported the success, at least of the initial stages of implementation of this initiative. Now, a few discussion points as to future directions for an initiative of this nature and how it could be sustained with further investments. There is a need to continue building this regulatory convergence through reforming a number of institutions in the Arab region and particularly in creating a legislative foundation that could support such harmonization. So, for example, the development of a common blueprint for food laws in the Arab region could be one of the elements that would support that. The possible also creation of a common food regulatory enhancement program using the same building blocks could also contribute towards further harmonization and coordination. The second point, there is a clear understanding that science-based and risk-based decisions are key in order to achieve such convergence. And in order to do that, the availability of data is also a key element to support decision-making processes. So the development of common plans and common investments that will support the availability of such data, but also continued investment in a food risk assessment capacity within the region could be elements that would support further sustainability and further success. And finally, looking at building progressively common building blocks of a harmonized environment. And some of the suggestions or some of the considerations is to look, for example, at the areas where pre-market approvals are needed and whether there is a way to create common decisions on pre-market approval. So essentially, for example, a common list of approved food additives in the region with also the same conditions of use that would be approved. The same would apply, for example, for pesticides and the way pesticide residues would be considered, or for veterinary drug residues. We know that in a lot of instances where you have technical barriers or differences of opinion on a traded commodity, in a high percentage of cases and of incidents, differences of opinions on maximum residue levels of these pesticides and of veterinary drugs could be the elements that are impeding the more fluid trade amongst countries. And of course, potentially continued investment in enhancing food inspection systems and making sure that these systems are risk-based, such that the limited resources be devoted to the most important areas of focus holders. I hope that these considerations were useful to review an initiative that was implemented over the past few years, aiming to create a more convergent food regulatory environment at the regional level. And I would be happy to consider questions and remarks from the participants throughout the session and beyond. Thank you again for the opportunity to contribute.